In the quiet village of Elmswood, where the wind whispered through ancient trees and cobbled paths wound like veins across the land, there lived a woman named Martha. To the townsfolk, Martha was the image of respectability, a woman of strong faith, a generous neighbor, a grieving widow who had raised her child alone after her husband's mysterious disappearance. Her laughter chimed at church gatherings. Her hands offered bread to the poor, and her eyes were always damp with the weight of other sorrows. But within the crumbling, ivy-cloaked house at the end of Willow Lane, the truth wore a far uglier face. Elsie, Martha's only daughter, lived beneath that roof like a ghost in her own home. She was a slight girl, thin as a reed, with soft brown eyes that flickered with fear more often than joy. From the time she could toddle across the kitchen floor, she had been pressed into labor. Scrubbing floors, washing clothes, chopping wood, cooking meals she would not be allowed to taste. These were her childhood memories. There were no lullabies, no bedtime kisses, no whispered words of love, only commands barked across empty rooms and the cold clink of plates left for her to wash. If Elsie cried, Martha's sharp voice would slice through the air. "Ungrateful little wretch," she'd sneer, "you should be thanking your stars I haven't thrown you to the wolves." And so, Elsie learned silence. She learned how to tuck her sadness deep inside, where even the cruel winter winds could not reach. To the villagers, Martha's mask never slipped. She attended every wedding, every funeral. She knelt in the front pew at every Sunday sermon, tears glistening on her cheeks. They praised her. They pitied her. Not one of them ever guessed what grew in the shadows of her home. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the air grew thick with the scent of rain, Elsie overheard something that made her blood run cold. She had been gathering firewood when she heard her mother's voice, low and sharp, through the cracked kitchen window. "She's more trouble than she's worth," Martha hissed. "I'll hand her over to you, no questions asked. Take her to the city, sell her if you must. I'll tell the villagers she ran away." Elsie's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Sell her? Like cattle? She clutched the firewood tighter, splinters digging into her palms, and crept back inside without a sound. That night, while the house slept, Elsie packed the few things she could call her own: a worn, one-eyed doll she had found in the gutter years ago, a crust of bread, and her father's old compass, the only relic she had of a man she barely remembered. Barefoot and trembling, she slipped out the door and into the night, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. The stars were her only companions, cold and distant. She walked until her feet bled, hid by day and moved by night. Days blurred together, hunger gnawed at her belly, and fear gnawed at her soul. She drank from brooks and stole apples from low-hanging branches, sleeping curled beneath roots and hedges. Just when despair was about to swallow her whole, help came in the form of a woman named Agatha. She found Elsie half conscious at the edge of the woods, dirt-streaked and shivering. Without hesitation, Agatha wrapped her in a heavy woolen shawl and carried her back to a small cottage that smelled of rosemary and fresh bread. Agatha asked no questions, offered no harsh words. She simply fed her, washed her, and let her rest. It wasn't until days later, when Elsie finally spoke through cracked lips, that Agatha learned the truth, every cruel detail spilled out in a trembling voice. Agatha listened, her eyes dark with sorrow and anger. Then she knelt before Elsie, placed her hands on the girl's thin shoulders, and said, "You are safe now, child. No one will hurt you here." And so Elsie began to heal. In Agatha's cottage, surrounded by warmth and kindness, she bloomed like a frostbitten flower touched by spring. She learned to knead dough, weave cloth, and read the old books stacked by the hearth. She grew stronger, taller, surer of herself. Back in Elmswood, Martha played the grieving mother. She clutched a locket to her chest and wept in the village square. "My poor Elsie," she sobbed. "She must have drowned, or been taken by wolves. Pray for her soul." The villagers, none the wiser, whispered their sympathies and praised her bravery. Years passed. Elsie became a young woman, her spirit no longer dimmed by fear. Agatha, now gray and slower on her feet, often reminded her, "Your past does not define you, Elsie. You are your own courage, your own hope. One crisp autumn day, Elsie knew she was ready. She would return to Elmswood not as a frightened child, but as someone who had survived and thrived despite everything. The market square bustled with life when Elsie arrived, cloaked in simple linen and confidence. Heads turned as she passed. There was something about her presence, a quiet strength that made people pause. She found Martha standing behind a stall, hawking jars of jam and loaves of bread. Her hair was grayer now, her back a little bent, but her eyes, those cold, sharp eyes, were the same. Their gazes met. Martha paled as if she had seen a ghost. Elsie stepped forward, her voice clear and unshaken. "You lied to them all?" she said, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "You mistreated me. You tried to sell me like a sack of potatoes. You don't deserve their pity. You don't deserve their prayers." The villagers turned to Martha in horror, whispers rising like smoke. The mask Martha had worn so carefully for so many years crumbled before their eyes. In the days that followed, Martha was shunned, forced to leave the village she had once ruled with false sweetness. She disappeared down the dusty roads, her name spoken only in bitter warnings. Elsie stayed. She built a life among the people who now truly saw her, not as a shadow, not as a servant, but as a survivor. And though the past had left scars upon her heart, they no longer controlled her. She had overcome the wicked mother. She had found her freedom. And for the first time in her life, she knew what it meant to be truly, wondrously home.